Hi everyone, I'm Anthony O'Flynn and this video is the part 2 of the Equinox energy update for the autumn equinox here in Australia and obviously the spring equinox in the Northern Hemisphere. So equinox will be on Tuesday the 21st of March at 7:25 Queensland time, and Latin. The meaning of equinox in Latin is equi, equal, and nox, night. Obviously this idea of this balance point between night and day. So obviously in the Southern Hemisphere now, the nights are getting longer, the days are getting shorter as we move towards the solstice from the equinox. Also it's astrological new year, and I detailed this in the other video, the auspicious moment of the sun entering Aries, which is effectively the astrological new year. And I also in that video go into detail the financial crisis, the economic collapse, the hyperinflation of the US dollar, the death of the US dollar, and the ramifications and implications of this globally. And this will be one of the defining events of this decade, will be the inevitable decline of the US dollar, definitely as the world's reserve currency. The inflation will continue. It's clear that the powers that be have entered the trajectory of saving the banks, of bailing out the banks, and therefore expanding the money supply, which will lead to greater inflation. So this will become a very major theme for this decade, and we're really only at the very beginning now of seeing the devastating effects of money printing. It never ends well. It never has ended well historically, and yet the powers that be continue on this path. So it shows that the institutions come before the actual currency. And just on that note, Credit Suisse has borrowed $50 billion from the Swiss National Bank. So the money printing, the expansion of the money supply, we are, basically now at the point of no return for this, in the sense that the currencies will be sacrificed in this great game, which is going to be a very, very challenging time for everybody around the world, because this will have global ramifications of the hyperinflation of the US dollar. So in my view, we'll basically be entering a depression. Forget recession. I mean, the way they manipulate the data and the statistics, they can come up with any numbers that they want, but we will be entering an economic depression, a global one. Difficult to say when, but the outcome is inevitable now, and it will perhaps happen suddenly. Some of the dominoes will fall. As things are in Australia, things are fairly stable with the banking system, the big four banks, but the inflation will still have a big effect on people's discretionary spending and their purchasing power, and where they choose to put their money in terms of savings. So all those issues I've really gone through in the other video, but now I'm going to talk about the more spiritual aspects of the shift where we're at now, and how I see things playing out in the next short term. So I make these updates, particularly in the context of the solstice and the equinoxes, obviously 4 times a year, and there's a combination of rational, logical, coherent thinking plus intuition. So the good news to start this video off is at least that the subtle flow of energy and the activation of the higher chakras this year has been very good to start the year off, much better than 2022. The activations are coming particularly through the crown, a third eye, Vishuddha chakra, the throat chakra. So the top 3 chakras are getting activated. I wouldn't say consistently, but there is a greater support coming from the subtle reality. And this subtle shift to the subtle plane is very, very, it's defining the entire shift, that the subtle reality shapes our physical reality, determines our physical reality. And perhaps the biggest aspect of this is actually the subtle reality changing in regard to the waves of energy connected to the heart that are now permeating the planet. And this is showing up in a lot of ways that I'll talk about in another video, but are a little bit difficult to see when you can continually look at all the challenges and the devastation of the war in Ukraine and all the other armed conflicts going on, and the violence and as the insanity grows, there is an undercurrent of this shift happening where the qualities of the heart are actually starting to show, but it's still like an undercurrent, so it's not always that obvious. But it is happening in the subtle reality first, and it becomes stronger and stronger in the subtle reality, which is very, very encouraging. So this is a good thing. So really, leading on from some of these themes around the effects of the economic crisis, is that there has been a gradual focus and emphasis on consumerism, on materialism in our culture. It's difficult to put an actual date on it, but it is intensified definitely over the course of my lifetime. If you look at the videos that you can see from the 70s, even in the mid 80s, part of the late 80s was an era of excess in some ways, but leading up to from the 70s, the mid 80s, people were actually much less materialistic. There wasn't the desire that people have today for technology, which wasn't around at the same time then as what it is now. But if you see the videos of cameras going along streets in suburbs in Australia, everyone had a very similar house. Everyone had pretty much a Ford or a Holden car in the driveway, often just one car. And there was a lot of egalitarianism, particularly in Australia, and that was considered to be a good thing. And that's where the phrase "a fair go" came from, that everyone would have the opportunity to thrive, at least at a material level. Now that doesn't exist anymore. And the emphasis that people have today on materialism, consumerism, that's actually going to get really knocked back in this economic crisis, which is a good thing spiritually. Because as people start to suffer materially, or their perception of their life is suffering because they can't afford to buy a brand new big TV, or they can't upgrade their car, all these sorts of things, they can't afford to go on a really expensive holiday. You're going to see gradually through this suffering the emergence of people actually turning to the spirituality more and more. And this will actually accelerate people's evolution. So this is very much a silver lining in terms of people's values and where they put their time and energy going forward, because there simply just won't be the opportunity for this mass debt-based consumerism, which has really characterized somewhere around the turn of the century. As I estimate it, that's not an empirical estimation, just an observation more subjectively. Somewhere in the early 2000s, something happened to the Australian egregore, at least here in Australia, the collective soul, where people basically started to become much more focused on consumerism, materialism, and also as a way of elevating their status or their perceived status. And often this is just fake wealth, because most of it is based on debt. So you're going to see this gradually start to fade out with large sections of the community, and people's values will shift. In the beginning, it won't become as obvious that it's becoming more spiritually orientated, but it will be a gradual process. It doesn't necessarily mean people will become more Christian orientated or something like that, but they'll look for different effects that are characteristic of the spiritual path, such as increased gratitude, appreciation of nature, even turning to more spiritual paths like yoga, meditation, these sorts of things, and also a focus on health, focus on self-sufficiency, these sorts of things, which perhaps would be looked to be like a lesser than lifestyle in some ways, but it's a reflection, if you can see in some ways, this increased intensity of this consumerism, this need to keep up with other people, keep up with the Joneses, that phrase. And yet at the same time, here in Australia, we have this outrageous mental health problem that is just completely dwarfs most other issues in terms of people's overall perception of their life, their level of happiness, some of these indicators of how they feel about themselves and so on, this lack of self-worth. And it's a reflection of the fact that people have become so externally focused, wanting this external validation continuously without ever actually discovering who they are inside or what's really important to them. And this introspection will actually fuel this spiritual evolution, will help accelerate the global awakening actually. So this is going to produce this effect. I talked about some of the other effects in the other video, but this effect will be quite profound because we think that there is this idea that we should be comfortable all the time. Everything should be really comfortable. Like we shouldn't fast. We shouldn't do ice baths. We shouldn't do long meditation. We shouldn't push ourselves. But because of that, we've become very lazy, very inert, and very entitled as a culture. And this is going to go through quite a transformation this decade. It's obviously starting this year. There's no pinpoint one day for some of these aspects, even though I'm doing an Equinox update, because they are a gradual shift that some people will connect with, while others it will take longer. And also on that, the Pluto transit into Aquarius will actually begin this month. And it will be short before it moves retrograde back into Capricorn again. But there is a lot of hype around this transit, and actually it's one of the transits that I've seen in the last, 10 years or so that people have really given a lot of emphasis to, that there'll be some radical shift when Pluto enters Aquarius. I don't see it being like that at all actually, and particularly because of the fact that it's about 2.5 months, something like that, that Pluto will be in Aquarius before it goes back into Capricorn. So really at best all we're getting is a taster. And the signature statement for Pluto is that it moves at the speed of a glacier, but also with the power of a tsunami. So Pluto is a slow moving, it's an outer planet, it's a slow moving planet, and it has, because of that, it affects the collective. So this is a big thing for the collective, and there big things will come over this 20-year transit of Pluto and Aquarius, but it won't be like fireworks when it does move into Aquarius later this month. So a lot of people will be disappointed in this, but because Pluto is the transforming planet, essentially, it takes what is no longer necessary, useful, and strips it back, and at the same time energize it with the sign that it's in. But the power of a tsunami means that its force is undeniable, is inevitable, basically. So for this reason, the Pluto and Aquarius transit that many people are pinning their hopes on, it won't deliver, in my view, these big fruits in just the short term of 1 or 2 weeks, but it will take a while for things to show up. But at the same time, it will be a powerful transit without question. Without question, it's going to be quite interesting to see what will happen. But by way of comparison, you can see that if Pluto is in Capricorn and Capricorn's ruling the institutions, these top-down structures and so on, at the end of this transit, well, it's not completely at the end of it, but as it is at the moment, we still have a banking system. Okay, it's not working effectively or with integrity, but it's still there. We still have all these institutions in terms of the government, the political structures and so on. So to think that all that would have gone away when Pluto is entering Capricorn at the beginning of that transit, again, is wrong. But there has been a reform, and I guess really, as I see it, more than anything, there's been a highlighting of that transit through Capricorn of the problems of the institutions, of the defects, of the lack of integrity and the lack of ethics, which has become quite apparent actually through that transit. And we're all hoping for better days and everything, but one big theme that has really started to become clear to me is that the suffering that many people are going through at the moment, whether it's economic or whether it's because of they didn't follow the mandates and they lost their jobs, or because they're depressed or they have anxiety, or they're unfulfilled in life, they don't really have a purpose, or there's a myriad of ways that people suffer on this planet. One theme that's really becoming apparent to me is this idea of soul power, that this will be a quality that is going to be developed en masse in this decade that will literally define the paradigm shift in a way that is not really clearly perceivable yet, because this soul power that people are going to develop will be largely through the suffering. Now, I don't think the suffering is necessary for this evolution to connect with the soul, but I do think that there's going to emerge some real, genuine spiritual warriors through this, some really powerful spiritual titans who are extremely fearless. And this is actually one of the big themes of our Easter retreat this Easter at Springbrook in the Gold Coast hinterland, is the connection to your soul and how to develop this soul power. Because when we tap into the soul power, when we connect with the soul, it gives a force that is truly irrepressible, and it gives a dynamism and a strength to the people who have this that is very rare in the world as things currently are. And it is going to help people carry them through this paradigm shift in a way that when we discover that the soul is eternal, that it is immutable in this way, that it has this connection to eternity. It's not necessarily eternity itself in the context of metaphysics, but it strips everything back from our ego and our false perception of who we are, and it diminishes the power of the ego, which gives it a sort of freedom to be more soul orientated. It's quite a deep process actually, but it's something that we all need to embody moving through this ongoing global paradigm shift. So this is going to become a big theme, not just through this quarter to the solstice update, which I'll give, but through the decade and beyond. Soul power, but not power in the sense of accumulating political power or financial power or something like that. The connection to the eternity of who we are as individuals, or Jivatman as it's known in yoga. This theme of basically the heart is something that's going to come up more and more, but the foundations for it are not as obvious as what people will see. And that's why the New Age movement is so diminished in its connection to soul power, because there's such a ridiculous focus on paranormal powers and the ascension and all these things, without really having integrated our traumas, our shadow, our limitations, and coming to terms with who we are in this limited human experience. There's just this idea of escapism, which it's spiritual bypassing 101, and that's why the New Age has shown so few fruits for what many people would compare it to in terms of classical spirituality and paths such as Buddhism or Kashmir Shaivism or Tantric yoga, whatever themes you want to really think about. And that's why there is this lack of depth to the metaphysical concepts that are completely necessary and relevant for spiritual evolution. So that is another theme that I see coming as well, is spiritual maturity developing even in the New Age movement. Gradually people will realize that the unicorns and rainbows ethos of the New Age is not serving them, and it won't really take you really any far. It's very limited as to where it can take you on the genuine journey of the awakening of your soul and connection to your heart, because the metaphysical techniques are very weak actually. And there's another, anyway, I'm getting off the topic here. So many of these themes are basically around the heart that we see moving forward. And the next big one that I see is the quality for those that have had the juice. You know what I'm talking about there, that they've had the juice, and the pride that many people in this soul group have, that they are really failing completely or struggling to overcome their pride to actually come to terms with the fact that they have been completely wrong. They've been completely lied to. Every single belief system around that they have around this is basically being socially engineered into them by the TV, that they have basically been conned, and it can be literally lethal, that the mistake that they've made for some people. For others, it's basically that they're sterile. For other people, that they have all kinds of autoimmune illnesses. For other people, cancers. For other people, nervous disorders. I mean, it's across the spectrum of health, and there are also some other metaphysical implications that are still not clear yet around this, as to what has actually happened with this experimental process that they've been involved in. So I hope you know what I'm talking about there. And so from a spiritual level, a lot of this is around the issue of pride, and this contraction or this clench around the ego, that there is this inability to overcome this pride and come to terms with the fact that, yes, you are wrong. Some people will embark on this journey. Some people will eventually start to embark on this journey, and there's a certain percentage that will literally refuse, regardless of the true evidence, the information, even when it's spewed out by the TV, that their belief systems, their values are simply a product of their own direct indoctrination. And so therefore there is an opportunity for this group of the juiced to move beyond pride. It will be a huge quantum leap in their evolution, and it will be very difficult, because a lot of these processes will actually be unconscious. They won't be done with a spiritual mentor. They won't be done in a spiritual setting. They won't be done in a spiritual school or with any real mentorship or guidance. But it will be, and because of this, it will be slow and chaotic, and there will be this element of denial, which it's understandable, really. I mean, if you're someone that actually believes what they see on the TV, to go from that level of consciousness to completely understanding, at least in this particular topic that I'm referring to, that you've been lied to, well, that's a massive awakening right there. So if you are on that journey already, then please be patient with people around you. But having said that, the splitting consciousness now is showing up, that many people are now not really having the same resonance frequency or vibration at a soul level with many of these groups. So now they've migrated away completely, or the relationships are just more professional now. And I don't mean in the terms of that's related to work only or a professional setting, but the relationships are so shattered that they're just sort of maintained for the sake of keeping peace, whatever that means to you, whether it's partner, ex-partner, friends, colleagues, all these sorts of various types of relationships. But there is still the potential. I mean, the question really is that this soul group has gone down this path of this decision making to take them on this journey, which is not necessarily bad, actually, because there's a lot of people out there that are totally fine, totally healthy. But there's always a spiritual dimension to everything, you see, and you can't overlook that. And this means that there is definitely this huge potential, but it's going to be interesting to see how many of those people actually utilize this potential and move forward with it and start to become outspoken and not live in this cowardly, sheepish way of living that really characterizes the collective here in Australia, as to the silence that is basically everywhere you see, that people are just completely failing to speak up and to have their voice heard and to express how they feel on these topics. And this is part of the test as well, actually. It's a different aspect, it's more related to courage, but it's still in the overall theme that this course of action, if it's destiny or free will, personally I think it's destiny for nearly everyone, to actually therefore now go on to an entirely different part of this journey, this taking you this far. Now where will it take you next? And again, that'll be individual and what people choose. And again, this idea is basically around the theme of humility, which is again connected to the heart. And this is also very important for people who are in a good place, for people who are healthy, for people who have solid relationships, solid friendships, for people whose finances are good, for people who are in a state of abundance, for people who have a purpose in life, who have a meaning in life. All the things, like they are in a state of alignment, not completely, but they are in a state of coherence with their soul and are at peace with themselves. All these things is to absolutely maintain a state of humility as best as possible through this. I mean, no one's perfect, and no one is being asked to be some enlightened master going through this shift, but at the same time to maintain a sense of humility in all these things, like in all these different aspects. Not just that you were so-called right about the whole events of the last few years. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a state of humbleness and in gratitude for everything that is good in your life and everything that you have received and have been given, and where the universe supports you. Because that saying, pride comes before the fall. Well, that's where the people of the juice have had. That's where a lot of that soul group is now. And this smugness is evaporating rapidly, and this virtue signaling, although it continues in different aspects of this social engineering program at a much broader level, it still means that this pride comes before the fall. And it's not to do this out of a state of fear or this fake humbleness, but there is a wisdom in being able to navigate this shift just with a state of gratitude, and to sort of not gloat, not be prideful, not boast, and these sorts of things. It's a big one. It's actually a really big one. And so many of these things ultimately are related to the heart. And as I see it, the 2023 is going to be a pretty massive year for the awakening. Every year now on, as I see it, will be a level of intensity that will increase in one way or another. Even if it looks very chaotic, that level will definitely increase. The chaos will increase, particularly at the material level, because this aspect of the financial crisis is going to be the greatest catalyst yet for the awakening. I mean, people are still getting ahead of themselves and talking about direct contact with UFOs, even the ascension itself, as it's referred to. I don't see any of that happening this year. There may be individuals who have some profound contact or something, but not at a mass collective level. We're not close to that yet in terms of consciousness, and I don't mean that in terms of linear years, but in terms of consciousness. And so much of the work at the evolutionary level is directly connected to the heart, one way or the other. And the life experience itself is such a wonderful opportunity to move into that state of all those beautiful qualities. And we're really going to see some incredible developments this year, particularly with the financial system, which I've detailed in the previous video. But this will hold the attention of the world the same way the events of the 2020, 21, 2022 did for the other reasons. So it's quite a profound time to be here. It's quite amazing. There is a certain electricity in the air as we move through this. There's not necessarily a heaviness. There is a shedding of the old as we move into the new. And this shedding is this fact that this paradigm is failing. It is destined to fail. It must fail so the new paradigm can be born. And this will be a challenging process. There's no escaping that. And that's why some of these qualities of resilience and inner strength and acceptance and patience are necessary to navigate the shift with ease and grace. Paradigm Shift Summit is coming up in June at Mantra, Mooloolaba on the Sunshine Coast, June 17 to June 19. Lots of exciting announcements about the speakers and the workshops on the Monday. So there's lots of information to come out about that. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. We live in epic times.